Hello there. So if you've watched a few videos ago, you'll know that I intended to read the book on long list this year as part of a little get myself back into reading and find some books that I might not necessarily have discovered otherwise. Since then I've gone a bit quiet. Now I'll be honest, the reading's been going really well. I'm happy with how I'm progressing in terms of the reading, but the idea of filming a video has just been really, I've tried a few times. Trust me, I've tried countless times. I've had Elliot in the background, I've had Elliot in my arms, I've tried all sorts of ways of making this work, but it just hasn't been, because he is going through a period where he does not want to nap. So in the days we are pretty busy. Making videos just hasn't been much of a possibility. However, today I've got my partner to have him because I wanted to talk about obviously the shortlist was released this week, and I thought it would be remiss, seeing as I'm doing this challenge, not to talk about the shortlist. Now I'll be honest, I couldn't have written this better, because I have been trying to read the books that I thought probably wouldn't be on the shortlist. Hopefully have the ones that were shortlisted left once the announcement had been made. So I left things like Hilary Mantel, obviously. I left, yeah, I just left the books that I thought would be right up there. And every single book that I have read / tried to read, because there is a DNF here and one that I'm still reading, is on the shortlist. I was so, I couldn't believe it. That's how good my judgment is. But I think it's fair to say that the shortlist this year is a bit of a, it's a bit out there, it's a bit left field. And at first I think I was really annoyed, actually, certainly about one and two, probably about two books that were on the shortlist, because I didn't think they deserved to be there, in my personal opinion, how I found reading them. But once you get past the fact that, you know, Hilary Mantel didn't make the shortlist, for example, you actually realise that I quite like the fact that they've done this. So most of the books on the shortlist are written by women, which is really refreshing to see. I think there's only 2 men on there, and there's a lot of debut authors, and also all of the books look at different cultures and all the people, although it's predominantly US based, all of the people sort of have origins in African countries, and just it is a very diverse mix of people. I'm not sure I'm 100% behind the fact that most of these people come from America. I think, you know, it is a UK based prize, and I think there should at least be some UK based authors in there, but the fact is that they're not just American authors. All of them have ties to sort of Zimbabwe or Ethiopia, etc, etc. So it is a diverse bunch. Now I was going to do sort of group paired reviews for these, and I have actually tried filming them multiple times over the past few weeks, which just hasn't happened. So I'm just going to talk about all of them here. It's probably going to be a bit of a bumper video, but I will try to be brief in my thoughts. So firstly, I will mention This Mornable Body by Tsitsi Dangarembga. I DNF'd this. I really didn't like it. Now I feel strange reviewing this because it is the third in a trilogy and I have not read the other 2. So instantly I felt like I probably wasn't qualified to make a judgment on this either way. However, most people have said that though they are a trilogy, they are very loosely based on each other. So in theory I should have been able to read this as a standalone. I'll be honest, I just didn't get along with it, and it was such a shame, because this is the book that I was really looking forward to reading. I think the title, This Mornable Body, was beautiful. I love it as a physical object. I love white things, so, you know, the white cover was always going to win for me. But I just read 50 pages and I just found that I really wasn't enjoying myself, and I really didn't want to pick it up. And I was almost finding excuses not to pick it up, which is obviously not what I want when I'm on a bit of a time frame with these books. And I read some reviews and everybody seemed to say much the same thing. Sadly for me, I mean, this is written in the second person, and second person's a funny one because it is a tense that I always want to work. I want to love it, and I personally love writing short stories in second person. But I've never ever found a You novel that works. Actually, I tell a lie. You by Caroline Kepnes is actually really good, but that kind of, the thing with second person is there are a lot of different ways to do it. It could be you as in the person in the book, as it is in You with Caroline Kepnes, and I think that works because it's kind of like one of the characters having a conversation with another character, or it could be you as in the reader, or it could be you as in, you know, there are so many different ways that you could do it, and very few of them actually seem to work in fiction. I find it just kind of, the trouble with it is it removes you almost from the story it takes a very, very skilled writer and a very, very good plot to pull it off, I think. And this for me just didn't have that. I think I felt really separated from the character. I didn't really care for her because of the usage, and then I felt like she was just concentrating on really bizarre, bland things, and as much as it was nice to get a glimpse into the life of these people in Zimbabwe, because I've never read a book set in Zimbabwe before, it was just dull. I felt like conversations were being relayed that just were irrelevant to anything, really long-winded descriptions of bus journeys, and I just couldn't get along with it. Sorry, I was very, very, very surprised to see this one on there. I thought out of all of the books that I've read so far, this definitely wouldn't be, but I mean, each to their own, you know. What's good and what's not is obviously totally objective, and I think this shortlist has shown that. Also, what I'm going to talk about first is Diane Cook's The New Wilderness. I have not finished this. I am about 3/4 of the way through. I was actually reading this when the shortlist was announced. So this is Diane Cook's fiction debut. I think she has got a short story collection out already. I was really intrigued by the concept for this. It's basically a dystopian-esque book that is set in a world where some disease or virus has spread the city, and cities are getting increasingly decrepit and unpleasant places to live, and a group of people move into a protected wilderness area, and sort of have to live by these new rules and find a new way of life. And I had to say, it really intrigued me to start with, and I thought it was going to be a really fast-paced book, and it's not that, which I don't mind at all because I don't love a fast-paced book. That said, it is a little bit slow for me, but I think that's the way I'm reading it, and obviously I'm not having much time to read it, so it does make it feel slower. I guess it's not particularly what I had in mind when I read the description, but actually it is really quite good. I think it's really interesting. I wouldn't say it's a book that's going to stick with me, but so far I'm getting vibes of kind of Station 11 and Our Endless Numbered Days kind of merged into one. So it is interesting, and I will give a proper review of that when I finish it. Then on to the books I have read. So firstly, I'll talk about these in the order of when I read them actually. So firstly, I read Avni Doshi's Burnt Sugar. This is set in India, and it's actually published in India as well as The Girl in White Cotton, rather than Burnt Sugar. Now, I'm not going to lie, I was really excited about this because I think it is a beautiful physical thing, and it's got really lovely end papers. I mean, I don't particularly know what the design has to do with the book, but I'm sure there's something that I've missed there. And I loved the title as well, Burnt Sugar. I thought that was really good. And also what intrigued me about this is that it's about a mother and daughter relationship, and I always think the mother and daughter relationship is probably the most intricate and interesting relationship that we have as human beings, so I'm always intrigued by books that explore this. However, most of them don't quite hit the mark for me. I'd say this one was more there than a lot of the mother-daughter books that I've read, but basically this looks at a woman who is dealing with, her mother is sort of starting to spiral into dementia, and she's dealing with this idea of looking after her mother and becoming the carer in the relationship, and sort of reminiscing how perhaps her mum wasn't the best carer for her, and also thinking about her own role as a potential mother in the future. For me, I liked parts of this. I thought they were really well written and interesting, but at the same time I thought the pacing wasn't that great. It's a weird one. It kind of, yeah, the pacing is all over the place, and towards the end we sort of enter this whole new section of the book that kind of doesn't seem to have any lead up. It just suddenly jumps into something completely different, which it was a bit jarring, I guess. I don't know, is this a debut? Yes, this is a debut as well, and I do think it reads like a debut. That said, it's well written. I think Avni Doshi is definitely one to watch, and as I say, I think she captures the mother-daughter relationship better than a lot of the novels I've read. I think it just could have done with a little bit more polishing and some joiner sections to make it flow better, basically. Then I read Shaggy Bane by Douglas Stewart. This is set in Glasgow during the mining years, and our character Shaggy Bane, we start when he's 15, and we know that he's living out on his own. He's living in a flat on his own, and that's rare. And then we go back to when he's a child and we look at how he came to be in that situation. And basically this predominantly follows his experience with his mother, who is an extreme alcoholic, and they are living in one of the mining communities in Glasgow, which is an area of extreme poverty anyway, and looking at how his mother's drinking affects her, how it affects him, why she drinks, and how she tries to get out of it and things like that. And it's a really heartbreaking and harrowing read. It kind of gave me vibes of Billy Elliot, and I think that's kind of, I mean, inevitably it's in a mining community, which Billy Elliot is. It's about a young boy who maybe doesn't fit in, isn't necessarily the normal young lad in this kind of community. So it was inevitably going to give me Billy Elliot vibes, but I think this is really well written. Would I say it's a Booker winner? Maybe not. I did enjoy it, but I was surprised to see it on the shortlist, I have to say. I would recommend it though. It was a really good read, and I really wanted to pick it up. I think what's really good about this, and what's excellent about the writing in this book, is that you are so rooting for Shaggy Bane, that some of the scenes in this where things aren't particularly kind to him, or life isn't particularly kind to him, literally hurt your heart. I thought he was a fantastic character. I think the mum as well, it's easy to write a character like her and just sort of demonise her and cast her aside, and I think she's really well written because she's very fleshed out, and it really looks at her struggle to get off alcohol, and the fact that basically her life is just constantly pushing her towards this bad cycle. Yeah, I would recommend it. As I said, I don't particularly know that it's a Booker winner for me personally, but I'm glad I read it, and I think it's one of those books that perhaps I wouldn't have picked up if it weren't for the Booker mission that I set myself, so I'm glad that I read that one. Then I read Real Life by Brandon Taylor. I have to say I wasn't looking forward to this one. I've discovered about myself that I don't generally like books with people on the cover, like real people. I just generally don't lean towards them, and I think this one especially, there's something about it that makes it look like a pop album or something, I don't know. Anyway, for that reason, I wasn't overly excited about reading it. Also, it says on the cover it's a new kind of campus novel. I don't really like that kind of thing. I don't really like coming of age novels, but I will say that this is a coming of age novel with a difference, and I think if I had known that going into it, I probably would have been more willing to give it a go, but I purposefully went into these not knowing much about them. So this follows Wallace, who is in college, and he is a black gay man. So instantly it's a coming of age novel with a difference, because I think a lot, in fact all of the coming of age novels I've read are about straight white people, or maybe queer white people, but never a queer black person. The interesting thing about this novel for me is that what makes it perhaps a well-written and good literary novel also makes it a novel that I didn't particularly love, which I always find really strange to say that, but let me explain. So Wallace is, obviously we're rooting for him already because he is a black queer character in a community that is predominantly based towards white straight people, so instantly he's got that struggle and we want him to do well and we're rooting for him. But then the more you read about Wallace, the more you realise that yes, he's the hero in his story, but he's not a particularly nice person, and I think the reason that works is because when we're young, we're not particularly nice. A lot of us do weird, horrible things, and a lot of us are quite self-centered, and, you know, everything's about what's going on in our heads. We join him when his dad just died, and we look at how he relates to his friendships, how he relates to his working environments, and just generally follow Wallace through this period. But yeah, he's not particularly nice. He's not very nice to his friends. He's quite self-centered. He's a bit selfish, and just frankly a little unpleasant at times. But I think that's interesting because it's easy to write a character like this and have him be like this perfect person who everybody wants to do well, but it's interesting because you still want him to do well even though he's not the nicest person in the world. And also what's interesting about this is that I think Wallace feels quite distanced from himself during this period. He's going through a period where he wants to find himself, and I feel like it's written very much like he's a passive participant in his life right now. He's a passive character all round, and I think that's partly why I didn't like him. But it's interesting because I think, especially when we're trying to find who we are and find our path in life, we can be quite passive. And yes, I felt a bit distanced from him as a character because of that, but I know why he was written in that way at the same time. And the other thing that I found that it's a good usage of a device, but it didn't necessarily make it the easiest book to warm to, is that, you know, there's no, how can I say this without spoiling things? It's not about Wallace's journey to finding himself particularly. It's not about him suddenly having this light bulb moment and being like, yes, this is what I'm going to do and this is who I need to be. And I think, as the title suggests, it's real life, and that is real life. I don't think we suddenly have this moment where we know what we want to be or who we want to be. We don't suddenly work it out. It's a gradual process. And again, I think that made it an irritating novel to read because it could potentially feel like there wasn't much progression of character, which we all love to see, some progression of character in a novel. But at the same time, it is real life, and I think in that sense it's an interesting device, and it works, strangely. So it's a mixed bag for me. As I said, I can see why things have been done the way they've been done. It just sadly made the reading experience not as good as it perhaps could have been for me. It's an interesting one, and it has stayed in my mind, so I don't know. But yeah, I don't know I'd particularly recommend it. One book I would recommend, and that's the last one that I've got to talk to you about, is The Shadow King by Maza Mengistu. I adored this book. Now, I'll be honest, it was one that I wasn't particularly looking forward to getting to because it's set at a time when Mussolini and the Italian army invade Ethiopia, and I didn't know that that was a thing that happened, and I kind of had it in my head that it was going to be really heavy in historical references that I just wouldn't get. And I'll admit I did some googling about this period, which I think is a good thing anyway if a book encourages you to Google about something, but I think also you can go into this without particularly knowing. All you need to know is that Italy invaded Ethiopia, really. And this looks predominantly at the female warriors who helped the Ethiopian effort and haven't necessarily had much coverage in history because it's all about the male soldiers, and not many people realise that the female soldiers also played a huge part. Obviously they predominantly went along to nurse the soldiers back to health and to help them out, but the women were basically like, no, we're going to help you, and they just kind of formed their own defence and just became badasses basically. And I really loved this. I think what I loved about this most is, I mean, the writing was phenomenal for me personally. I've heard mixed reviews about it, which really surprises me because I thought it was beautifully written. Definitely the best written book that I've read on the shortlist as a whole. But I loved that it doesn't just look at the Ethiopia and Italy clash and the battle that commences between them. It also looks at the battles that women face in general. So it looks at the fight that they have against men on their own side as well as men on the other side. It looks at the battle that they fight against each other. And I think it's just a really interesting and brave book in that sense, especially because it looks at the battles that women, as I say, fight against each other. You know, I think there's a temptation to say that men are the enemy, but actually I think women can be just as cruel to women a lot of the time, and this looks at sort of class divides between women and how that separates them and how the upper class women treat the perhaps lower class women, and I just found that really interesting. I think ultimately this is a story about how strong women have to be and how they're constantly fighting something, and I loved that. I absolutely loved that. I think it's also interesting because it doesn't just look at the Ethiopian side of things. There is also a perspective from the Italian side. We predominantly look at a photographer who ends up becoming very important to the women in the Ethiopian battle. And I think it's interesting because, again, it's easy to just say that Italy were in the wrong because they were invading and leave it at that, leave them as these sort of distant enemies, but it doesn't do that. It takes us right into their camp, and it shows us the human side of the people who are fighting there too, who are just fighting for their country and following orders. Yeah, I can't recommend this book enough. I was going to read out some pieces, but actually I could have read out anything in this book and it would have been beautiful. But I think the pieces that I loved the most are scenes of sexual violence, and I'll be honest, there are quite a few of them, if that makes you uncomfortable. However, I would say they are the best. It's difficult to say the best. They are the best written scenes of sexual violence that I've ever read. I think they are not too crass, but also very cutting and just gloriously poetic. I just can't recommend it enough. I loved it. Can I say I'm backing this for winner? I think I am, though. I think out of all of the shortlisted books, this was definitely the one that caught my attention and I just adored it. It's the first 5-star book of the year for me, and I will definitely be revisiting it in the future. So yeah, those are the books I've read, and those are the books that were shortlisted. I mean, literally, you could not have made it up. Every single book. Anyway, Anyway, I'm still going to be reading the other books. I've still got 2 to buy. I'm listening to one on audio, I've read one, and I'm going to read the others afterwards. And I will make a video, probably a whole video again, talking about them, or I might do them in separate individual reviews as pairs or something like that. But anyway, I just wanted to do the shortlist video as on the whole, seeing as I didn't get a chance to film it before the shortlist was announced like I had hoped. Please let me know down below what your thoughts are on the shortlist, if you are pleased that it is such a diverse coverage, or if you are really sad not to see authors like Hilary Mantel on there, and I will see you next time. Bye!